The conference room on the 47th floor smelled like leather and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city below, where morning traffic crawled like ants through concrete canyons. Inside, 20 executives sat around a table worth more than most people owned in a year, their suits pressed sharp enough to cut glass. At the head of the table, Robert Castellan leaned back in his chair, gold cufflinks catching the light as he gestured dismissively at the presentation screen. The quarterly numbers weren't just good. They were obscene. His tech empire had swallowed 3 competitors in 18 months, and the stock price climbed like it had forgotten gravity existed. The door opened. Nobody looked up at first. Assistants came and went. Coffee got refilled. Documents appeared and disappeared. But this wasn't an assistant. The man who entered wore clothes that had been washed so many times the fabric held memory more than color. His work boots left no marks on the polished marble, but their scuffed leather told stories of job sites and long days. Gray hair, neatly combed but thinning. Hands that trembled slightly as he clutched a worn folder against his chest. He couldn't have been less than 70, maybe older. The lines around his eyes suggested decades of squinting at blueprints or struggling with small print. He stood just inside the doorway, shoulders straight despite the weight of years, and waited. Robert noticed him third. His chief financial officer noticed first, frowning at the interruption. His director of operations noticed second, already reaching for the phone to call security. But Robert held up one hand, curiosity temporarily overriding irritation. The old man didn't belong here. That much was obvious. This floor required clearance, credentials, appointments scheduled weeks in advance. People didn't just wander into strategy meetings. The old man cleared his throat. The sound seemed too loud in the sudden silence. "Mr. Castellan," he said. His voice carried the rough edge of someone who'd spent years breathing dust and chemicals. "I need to speak with you about the Northridge project." Robert's eyebrow lifted. The Northridge project. Luxury condos going up on the east side. 40 stories of glass and steel that would redefine the skyline. Penthouses already selling for 8 figures before construction finished. It was his crown jewel, his monument. And this man, this nobody in worn-out clothes, wanted to discuss it. "Security will be here in a moment," Robert said, not unkindly, almost amused. "But I'm curious. How did you get up here?" The old man's jaw tightened. "I rode the service elevator. Told them I was here to fix something. Which I am, if you'll listen." Someone at the table snorted. Robert raised his hand again, silencing them. He studied the intruder with the detached interest of someone examining an unexpected variable. The man held his folder like it contained something precious. His knuckles were white. "You have 30 seconds, Robert said. "Explain." The old man stepped forward. Just one step, but it closed some invisible distance. "The foundation specs you're using for Northridge. The soil compaction ratios, the rebar placement, the concrete mixture. They are wrong. Not a little wrong. Catastrophically wrong. In 10 years, maybe 15, that building will start to settle. Unevenly. The stress fractures will begin in the underground parking structure and work their way up. By the time anyone notices, it'll be too late to fix without tearing the whole thing down." The room erupted. Not with concern. With laughter. Robert didn't laugh. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers steepled. "Bold claim. Do you have credentials? Engineering degree? Professional certification?" The old man's face flushed. "I worked construction for 48 years. I've built more buildings than most engineers will ever see. I know what holds and what fails. And I'm telling you, that foundation won't hold." 48 years, Robert repeated slowly. He glanced at his team. They were still smiling, enjoying the show. Impressive longevity. But I have 17 structural engineers who signed off on those plans. Each one has multiple degrees. Decades of combined experience. They use computer modeling, soil analysis, stress testing. Everything verified. And you think they are all wrong. I know they are. Before we proceed, kindly comment where you are watching from. Let me know what corner of the world is tuning into this story. Your location matters more than you might think. Drop it in the comments now. Robert sat back. The amusement in his eyes shifted to something colder. "Here's what I think happened. You're probably union. Maybe you worked one of my sites once. Got laid off. Felt slighted. Now you've convinced yourself you found some flaw that doesn't exist. It's almost sad. I'm not union, the old man said quietly. Haven't been for 30 years. And I've never worked for you. But I've worked on ground like that Northridge plot sits on. I've seen what happens when people cut corners or trust computers more than experience. I've watched buildings crack and families lose everything because someone important didn't listen to someone they thought wasn't. Robert's chief financial officer spoke up. This is ridiculous. We're in the middle of a meeting. Security should have been here by now. As if summoned, 2 uniformed guards appeared in the doorway. Robert waved them off. Not yet. This was becoming interesting. Not the man's claims. Those were clearly nonsense. But the audacity. The sheer nerve it took to walk into this room and challenge him. That deserved something, if only for entertainment value. Tell you what, Robert said, standing. He buttoned his suit jacket, a gesture of finality. You seem convinced. So I'll make you an offer. A test. Right here. Right now. The old man's eyes narrowed. Suspicious but listening. Robert walked to the side wall where a scale model of the Northridge building sat on a pedestal. Next to it, architectural plans were mounted under glass. He gestured at them. You say the foundation is flawed. I say it's perfect. So prove it. Explain to me and everyone here exactly what's wrong. Use the plans. Use the model. Show us the flaw. He paused, letting the challenge sink in. But here's the thing. If you can't, if you waste our time with some vague construction worker hunches, you don't just leave. I'll make sure everyone in this industry knows your name. Every contractor, every site manager. You'll never work again. Not even part-time. Not even off the books. You'll be the cautionary tale people tell about washed-up workers who thought they knew better. The room went silent. Genuinely silent this time. No more laughter. This had shifted from amusing interruption to public spectacle. Several executives pulled out their phones, already recording. This would be the story they told at cocktail parties. The day some delusional old man tried to lecture Robert Castellan about engineering. The old man's hands stopped trembling. He looked at Robert, then at the model, then back at Robert. Something moved behind his eyes. Not fair. Calculation. He set his folder down on the table. His fingers brushed its worn cover one more time, like touching something sacred. If I show you the flaw, he said slowly, what do I get? Robert smiled. There it was. The negotiation. Everyone wanted something. If you can actually prove a genuine structural flaw exists, one my engineers missed, I'll personally hire you as a consultant. $20,000. You review the plans, suggest corrections, and then you disappear. Fair. $20,000. The number hung in the air. For Robert, it was lunch money. For this man, it was probably 6 months of rent. Maybe more. The old man nodded once. Done. He moved to the model with surprising speed. His hands, which had trembled before, steadied as they touched the miniature building. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he studied it from 3 angles, occasionally glancing at the mounted plans. His fingers traced invisible lines along the foundation. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. No more nervousness. This was someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. And that's when Robert Castellan began to realize he might have made a mistake. The old man's fingers moved across the model like he was reading Braille. He touched the miniature underground parking structure, the support columns, the representation of the foundation itself. 20 pairs of eyes watched him, some still smiling, waiting for the inevitable fumbling, others growing quieter, noticing something in his body language. The confidence of muscle memory. You see this? The old man pointed at the southern corner of the model's base. Your foundation goes down 42 feet. Standard for a building this size in this location. But the soil composition isn't standard. You've got clay deposits at 38 feet. Not throughout the plot. Just here and here. He indicated 2 more spots, forming a rough triangle. Your core samples missed them. Probably because you took samples every 20 feet, and these deposits sit in the gaps. Robert crossed his arms. Clay exists in most urban soil. Our engineers account for that. Not this kind. The old man pulled papers from his folder. They were yellowed, creased from years of storage. Site surveys, geological reports. Some dated back 40 years. This neighborhood used to be wetlands. Got filled in the 1960s. The clay underneath isn't just regular clay. It's expansive clay. Bentonite. When it gets wet, it swells. When it dries, it contracts. You're building on ground that moves. One of the engineers at the table, a woman named Patricia Chen, leaned forward. She'd been quiet until now. We tested for soil expansion. The results were within acceptable parameters. The old man didn't look at her. He kept his attention on the model. You tested the top layers, the fill dirt, but the bentonite sits deeper. And your foundation design uses friction piles, not end-bearing piles. That means the weight of the building transfers through friction along the length of the pile, not just at the bottom. When the clay swells, it pushes against those piles unevenly. When it contracts, it pulls away. Over years, that creates movement. Tiny amounts at first, inches. But in a building this tall, inches at the bottom become feet at the top. He pulled out another document. A calculator-covered page showing handwritten stress calculations. The math was dense, professional. Not the work of someone guessing. Your rebuy pattern assumes uniform load distribution. But if the foundation settles unevenly, the stress concentrates at specific points. Right here. He tapped the model again. The parking structure. For levels underground, the ceiling of the bottom level will crack first. Hairline fractures that let in groundwater. The water reaches the expansive clay, makes it swell more. Feedback loop. Within a decade, you'll have visible cracks in the lobby. Within 15 years, the elevators won't align properly with the floors. Within 20 years, the building becomes uninhabitable. Silence. Robert looked at Patricia. She was no longer leaning back. She was studying the old man's papers, her phone out, pulling up digital versions of the original soil reports. Her frown deepened as she scrolled. The original surveys from the 1960s, she said quietly, show bentonite deposits. But they weren't included in our recent testing because the methodology focused on the top 40 feet. We assumed the historical fill eliminated the issue. The old man finally looked at her. Assumptions kill buildings. Another engineer, younger, tried to salvage the situation. Even if there's clay, mud and foundation engineering can handle soil movement. We use flexible joints, expansion accommodation, waterproofing systems. You use them when you know you need them, the old man said. Your design doesn't account for expansion because your testing said there wasn't any. So you didn't include the systems that would compensate. You saved money on materials you didn't think you needed. Robert felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear yet, but recognition. This wasn't a rambling conspiracy theorist. This was someone who understood not just construction, but the economic pressures that drove construction decisions. The corners that got cut when budgets tightened. The assumptions made when testing was expensive and timelines were short. The old man pulled out one more document. This one was different. Older. A photograph, actually. Black and white, faded. It showed a building mid-collapse. One corner sunk 15 feet lower than the other three. The entire structure twisted like someone had wrung out a towel. Parker Building, the old man said. Detroit, 1987. 30 stories. Built on fill over wetlands. Friction piles. No accommodation for expansive clay. It stood for 12 years before the settling became critical. They evacuated it in time. Nobody died. But the building was a total loss. Demolished. I worked the demolition crew. Spent 3 months tearing down something that should have stood for a century. He placed the photograph on the table where everyone could see it. Your building will do the same thing. Maybe slower, maybe faster, depending on rainfall and groundwater fluctuation. But it will happen, and when it does, you won't be able to say nobody warned you. Robert picked up the photograph. The resemblance was unsettling. Not in architecture. The Parker Building had been Art Deco, nothing like his sleek modern tower. But in the fundamental failure, the way one corner had simply given up, dragging the rest of the structure down with it. Patricia was typing rapidly on her tablet. Running numbers. Cross-referencing. Her expression grew more troubled with each calculation. If the clay deposits are where he says they are, she said slowly, and they have the expansion characteristics of bentonite, then yes. The current foundation design is insufficient. We'd need to switch to end-bearing piles. Drill down to bedrock. That's another 60 feet in some spots. The cost increase would be substantial. 8 figures. Maybe 9. The room absorbed that number. Substantial didn't begin to cover it. 9 figures meant project delays, investor questions, potential contract renegotiations. It meant admitting the entire foundation design needed to be scrapped and redone. Robert set down the photograph. He looked at the old man, really looked at him, past the worn clothes and the trembling hands, seeing instead the sharp mind, the decades of accumulated knowledge, the pattern recognition that came from watching buildings succeed and fail for nearly half a century. "Who are you?" Robert asked, not hostile, genuinely curious now. The old man hesitated. His hand went to his folder, touching it again with that same reverent gesture. "My name is Thomas. Thomas Brennan. I worked structural foundation crews from 1975 to 2023. Started as a laborer. Worked my way up to senior foreman. I've set foundation for hospitals, airports, office towers, bridges. I've also watched 5 buildings fail catastrophically due to foundation issues. Each time, someone knew. Someone saw the problem coming. And each time, nobody with power listened to them." He paused, and something raw entered his voice. "The last building that failed, the Riverside Plaza in Kansas City, my daughter worked there. Administrative assistant, 14th floor. They evacuated when the cracks got bad. Most people got out. She went back for a coworker who used a wheelchair. She got him out, but the stairwell collapsed while she was still in it. The room went perfectly still. Thomas's hands shook again, but this time it wasn't nervousness. It was grief held under tight control. She survived. Broken back, broken pelvis, internal injuries. She'll never walk again. The building's owners knew about the foundation problems for 2 years before it got critical. Consultants had warned them. They chose to delay repairs because it would have meant closing the building. Lost revenue. Inconvenience. They gambled that they had more time. He looked directly at Robert. "You seem like a smart man. Successful. But success makes people think they're immune to reality. You're not. Your building will fail. And when it does, someone like my daughter will pay the price. So I came here to give you the same warning those consultants gave the Riverside Plaza owners. What you do with it is your choice." Robert said nothing. He couldn't. The weight of those words, delivered without drama or manipulation, just flat truth, settled over the room like a physical presence. Patricia broke the silence. "We need to halt the foundation work immediately. Run new soil surveys. Bring in a geotechnical specialist. If he's right, and I think he is, we're looking at a complete redesign." The chief financial officer made a strangled noise. "Do you have any idea what that will cost? The delays alone will trigger penalty clauses in a dozen contracts. The investors will lose their minds. The alternative," Patricia said coldly, "is building a tower that collapses in 15 years. I'd rather explain cost overruns than body counts." Robert walked to the window. 4 to 7 floors below, the city churned. Somewhere out there, the Northridge site sat empty, waiting for the foundation work to continue. Tons of steel and concrete ready to be poured into a design that would doom the building before it even opened. He turned back to Thomas. "You said you have those soil surveys from the 1960s. Where did you get them?" Thomas's expression softened slightly. "My father worked the original wetland fill project. He kept records. Everything. When I heard about your building going up on that plot, I pulled his old files. Did the math. Realized what would happen. I tried going through proper channels. Called your engineering firm. They said I needed to submit a formal report through their review process, which requires credentials I don't have anymore. I'm retired. License lapsed. So I did what I had to do. I came directly to you." Robert made a decision. The kind of decision that separated good leaders from failing ones. The kind that cost money and pride but saved lives and reputations. "Patricia, halt all foundation work at Northridge effective immediately. I want a full geological survey, independent consultants, the entire site analyzed. If Mr. Brennan is correct, and the preliminary evidence suggests he is, we redesigned from the ground up. He looked at Thomas. $20,000 was the offer if you found a real flaw. You found a catastrophic one. That number just went up. I want you on site every day during the new survey. I want you reviewing every report. I want your 48 years of experience making sure we don't miss anything else. Thomas nodded slowly. I'll do it, but not for money. I'll do it so nobody else's daughter gets hate. Robert extended his hand. Thomas shook it. His grip was strong. The grip of someone who'd worked with his hands his entire life. The executives who'd been recording on their phones suddenly realized they captured something very different from what they'd expected. Not a humiliation. A rescue. The day an old man with worn-out clothes and handwritten calculations saved hundreds of lives that would have been lost 15 years in the future. As the meeting dissolved, people gathering around Thomas to examine his documents more closely, Robert stayed by the window. He thought about assumptions, about the danger of surrounding yourself only with people who thought like you, who had the same credentials, the same blind spots, about how close he'd come to building a monument to his own arrogance. His phone buzzed. His assistant. So, there are reporters downstairs. Someone leaked that there was an incident in the strategy meeting. They are asking questions about the Northridge project. Robert smiled grimly. Tell them we've temporarily halted foundation work to implement additional safety measures recommended by a consulting expert. Tell them we're grateful for the insight and committed to building the safest possible structure. And get me everything we have on the Parker building collapse in Detroit, 1987. I want to know what we almost repeated. He hung up and looked once more at Thomas, who was now surrounded by engineers, all of them listening intently as he explained soil mechanics using nothing but gestures and 30-year-old documents. The man who wasn't supposed to be in this room. The man who saved them all. Before moving on, take a moment to like this video. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe so you never miss another story. And check the description box below for more incredible true tales. Your support means everything. The question came from the youngest engineer in the room, a recent graduate named Michael who still carried the arrogance of perfect grades and top-tier university credentials. Where exactly did you learn to do those calculations? They are graduate-level geotechnical analysis. That's not standard foreman training. Thomas didn't answer immediately. He was looking at his folder again, that worn thing he'd carried in like a shield. His fingers traced its edge, and something shifted in his expression. Not anger, something deeper. Memory mixed with pain. My father, Thomas said finally. James Brennan. He taught me. Patricia, who'd been reviewing the 1960s surveys on her tablet, looked up. James Brennan. That name sounds familiar. Thomas opened the folder fully for the first time. Inside weren't just surveys and calculations. There were photographs. Dozens of them. Construction sites from decades past. And in many of them, a tall man with Thomas's same jaw and eyes, wearing a hard hat, standing beside massive equipment or pointing at blueprints spread across makeshift tables. My father never went to college, Thomas said. Couldn't afford it. He started working construction at 15, lying about his age to get hired. This was 1949. Post-war building boom. Everyone needed workers. He was smart, though. Brilliant, actually. He buy engineering textbooks from used bookstores and study them at night. Taught himself mathematics, physics, soil mechanics, structural analysis. By the time he was 30, he could calculate load distributions in his head faster than most engineers could do it on paper. He pulled out one photograph in particular, a young James Brennan, maybe 40 years old, standing in front of a half-built bridge. The photo was dated 1974. He became a senior engineer for Morrison Construction. Worked his way up through pure skill. No degree, just decades of self-education and practical experience. He designed foundations for some of the biggest projects in the Midwest. Hospitals, government buildings, infrastructure. Everything he touched stood firm. Still standing now, most of them. Robert moved closer, studying the photograph. Morrison Construction. That company doesn't exist anymore. No, Thomas said. It doesn't. It went bankrupt in 1982, but not because of engineering failures. Financial mismanagement. They overextended on contracts they couldn't fulfill. When it collapsed, my father was 53, too old for most firms to hire, especially without a formal degree. He spent his last 20 years working smaller jobs, private consultations, nothing like what he'd done before. Thomas's voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room stop what they were doing and listen. He died in 2004. Heart attack on a job site. He was 75 years old and still working because his pension had disappeared when Morrison went under. He spent his whole life building things that mattered, and he died with almost nothing. But before he died, he taught me everything he knew. Every calculation method, every soil analysis technique, every warning sign that meant a building would fail. He made me promise I'd use it, that I wouldn't let his knowledge die with him. Thomas pulled out another document. This one was newer, printed on home computer paper, the ink slightly faded. A letter. This is from the structural engineer who reviewed the Riverside Plaza, the building where my daughter got hurt. He sent it to the building owners 2 years before the collapse. It details every problem, every risk, every recommendation for immediate repair. They ignored it. When the building failed and the lawsuit started, this letter disappeared from their files. But the engineer had kept a copy. He sent it to me after my daughter's accident. Wanted me to know it wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate choice. He set the letter on the table where everyone could read it. Patricia picked it up, her face growing pale as she read. They knew, she whispered. They absolutely knew. Thomas nodded. People always know, or they have the opportunity to know if they'd listen. That's why I'm here. Because when I ran the calculations for your building, I saw the same pattern. A choice being made right now, before the failure happens, that will determine whether people die later. Robert felt something crack open in his chest. This wasn't about money or reputation anymore. This was about the weight of responsibility that came with power. The knowledge that his decisions would ripple forward through time, affecting people he'd never meet, in ways he couldn't fully predict. Your father, Robert said. Did he leave other records? Other projects he worked on? Thomas laughed, but it was tired. He left everything. 40 years of files, calculations, photographs, site reports. I've got boxes of them in my apartment. After he died, I couldn't throw them away. It felt like erasing him. So I kept them. All of it. Michael, the young engineer, spoke up again. Those records could be invaluable. Historical case studies, construction techniques, soil analysis from sites all over the region. That's primary source material. It's a life's work, Thomas corrected. My father's entire professional existence, documented in pencil and paper. He always said computers would take over someday, but numbers didn't change. Physics didn't change. The ground didn't care if you calculated its behavior on paper or on a screen. It only cared if you got the math right. Patricia was typing again, but this time into a search engine. Her eyes widened. James Brennan. There's an old article here from 1978. He consulted on the Fairmont Hospital complex. The article calls him a genius, quotes him extensively about innovative foundation techniques for building on difficult terrain. She turned a tablet around. The article showed James Brennan, younger than in Thomas's photographs, standing next to architectural models. The headline read, "The Engineer Without a Degree, How One Man's Self-Education is Changing Construction Standards." Thomas smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time since entering the room. He was proud of that article, kept it framed on his wall, used to joke that it was worth more than any diploma. Robert looked at the article, then at Thomas, then at the pile of documents spread across his conference table. An idea was forming, not just about the Northridge building. Something bigger. Mr. Brennan, he said slowly, what if we did more than just fix this one project? What if we made sure your father's knowledge, and yours, became part of how we approach every building? Not as a one-time consultation, but as a fundamental change in how we evaluate projects. Thomas's expression was cautious. I'm listening. We create a review board. Independent experts who examine major construction projects before they break ground. Not just credentialed engineers, though we'll have those too, but experienced field workers. People who've seen projects fail and know what the warning signs look like. We fund it properly, give it real authority to halt projects that pose risks. And we name it after your father. The James Brennan Foundation Safety Initiative. The room went quiet. Patricia was nodding slowly. Even the chief financial officer, who'd been horrified by the cost implications earlier, looked thoughtful. Thomas stayed at Robert for a long moment. You're serious? Completely. Your father spent his life building things that lasted. He deserves recognition for that. And more importantly, his methods deserve to be preserved and used. How many other buildings are being designed right now with the same flaws we almost built into Northridge? How many could be caught before they become disasters? Thomas's eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. He would have liked that. He always said his biggest frustration was watching people make the same mistakes over and over because they refused to learn from history. Robert extended his hand again. Then let's stop the cycle. Work with us. Not just on Northridge. On everything. Help us build a system that catches these problems before they become tragedies. Thomas shook his hand. On one condition. The foundation doesn't just review buildings. It trains people. Young workers coming up. The ones who don't have access to formal education. We teach them what my father taught me. We make sure knowledge gets passed down, not locked away behind university paywalls. Done, Robert said without hesitation. Patricia was already making notes. We'll need to formalize the structure, establish funding, recruit board members. But this is absolutely doable. And honestly, it's overdue. The industry has been operating on a broken model for decades. Michael, the young engineer, raised his hand tentatively. Could I work with Mr. Brennan on cataloging his father's records? That material should be preserved properly, digitized, indexed, made accessible to researchers and practitioners. Thomas looked at him, saw past the arrogance to genuine interest. You'd be willing to learn from someone without letters after his name. Michael had the grace to look embarrassed. I'd be honored to learn from someone with 48 years of real-world experience. My professors taught me theory. You can teach me reality. The tension that had filled the room when Thomas first entered had completely transformed. What had started as confrontation had become collaboration. What could have been humiliation for Robert had become an opportunity to do something meaningful. Over the next hour, they worked out the details. The immediate soil survey for Northridge. The formation of the Foundation Initiative. The preservation of James Brennan's records. Thomas's role as both consultant and educator. The PR strategy to explain why Robert was halting a major project and investing in safety measures that weren't legally required. As people filed out, energized by the unexpected turn the day had taken, Robert and Thomas stood alone by the window. You took a risk coming here, Robert said. You could have been arrested for trespassing, banned from every building I own. Instead, you're about to become the face of a safety initiative that might change the industry. Thomas shrugged. I'm an old man. I've buried my father, watched my daughter lose her ability to walk, lost friends to building collapses that could have been prevented. What did I have to lose by trying? Your reputation. Your pride. Pride doesn't matter when buildings fall, Thomas said simply. My father taught me that too. He used to say the only thing that matters is whether your work stands up after you're gone, whether you left things stronger than you found them. Robert looked out at the city. Somewhere in that sprawl, the Northridge site sat empty, waiting for the foundation that would have doomed it, waiting now for a different approach. A better one. Your father left things stronger, Robert said. And so will you. Thomas nodded. He closed his folder, its purpose fulfilled. But he held on to it. Some things you carried not because you needed them, but because they reminded you where you came from. Who taught you? What mattered? They shook hands one more time, and Thomas left the conference room. But he wasn't escorted out by security. He was accompanied by 3 engineers, all of them asking questions about soil mechanics and foundation failures and the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom. Robert stayed by the window, watching the city below, and made a silent promise to a man he'd never met. A self-taught engineer named James Brennan who died on a job site at 75, still trying to build things that would last. His work would last now. Robert would make sure of it. In case you haven't yet, please like this video, Comment with your thoughts on what just happened. Share this story with someone who would appreciate it. Subscribe for more powerful narratives, and check the description box below for additional true stories that will move you. 3 months passed. The Northridge site no longer sat empty. Workers moved across it every day, but not pouring concrete. They were drilling. Core samples pulled from 60 feet down, analyzed by 3 separate geotechnical firms. Thomas had been right about all of it. The bentonite clay deposits sat exactly where his father's 40-year-old surveys predicted. The expansion characteristics matched the calculations Thomas had shown on that first day. The original foundation design would have failed, probably within 12 years based on the refined modeling. Robert stood at the site's edge on a Tuesday morning, watching engineers mark new drilling locations. The cost overruns had been as painful as predicted. 9 figures. Investor conference calls had been tense. But the alternative, discovered during the expanded surveys, made even the most profit-focused board member grateful for the delay. The bentonite deposits extended under an adjacent property where another developer had been planning a similar tower. That project had been quietly shelved after Robert shared the geological data. 2 buildings saved instead of 1. Thomas stood beside him, though he spent most days in a trailer on site, reviewing reports and teaching a rotation of young engineers who'd volunteered for what they were calling the Brennan Training Program. Word had spread through the industry. Learning from Thomas Brennan, the man who'd stopped the Northridge disaster, had become a credential people actively sought. "Your father would be proud," Robert said. Thomas watched a drill rig lower a new bit into the ground. He'd be satisfied. Pride wasn't his motivation. Correctness was. Patricia approached, carrying a tablet and wearing a hard hat. She'd taken personal oversight of the Northridge redesign, treating it like a second chance to get engineering right. The final foundation plans are ready for review. End-bearing piles to bedrock, waterproofing systems rated for expansive soil, monitoring sensors throughout the underground structure. This building will stand for 200 years. If it's built right, Thomas corrected automatically. Patricia smiled. "When it's built right, under your supervision." She pulled up architectural renderings on her tablet. The building looked the same from the outside, sleek glass and steel reaching into the sky. But the foundation was completely different. Deeper, stronger, smarter. Expensive, but sound. Robert's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and answered immediately. "Governor, thank you for calling back." He stepped away for privacy, but his body language was positive. Animated. When he returned 5 minutes later, he was smiling. "The state legislature is interested in the foundation initiative," he said. "They are considering making independent safety reviews mandatory for all buildings over 30 stories. And they want to use our model as the template." Thomas absorbed that slowly. Mandatory reviews. That would have saved the Riverside Plaza. "That's exactly what I told the governor, along with a dozen other near misses we've identified in the 3 months since we started reviewing projects. The pushback will be intense. Developers hate delays, but the political appetite is there." Your story resonated. Thomas didn't respond immediately. He was watching a young engineer, a woman barely 30, taking soil measurements under the guidance of one of Thomas's former crew supervisors. She'd been one of the first volunteers for the training program, eager to learn practical application alongside her theoretical knowledge. She was good, careful, listened more than she talked. "That's Keisha," Thomas said. "Graduated top of her class from Cornell. Could work anywhere. She spent last week in my apartment going through my father's files, digitizing his handwritten calculations from the 1960s. She said it was the most valuable education she'd received in 5 years of engineering school." "How much of your father's work have you preserved so far?" "About 40%. Michael has a team of students helping. They are treating it like an archaeological project. Every document cross-referenced, every calculation verified against modern standards. Most of it holds up. Some of it's actually ahead of current practice." Robert made a decision he'd been considering for weeks. "I'm establishing a permanent archive. Physical and digital. Climate-controlled storage. Professional archivists. Open access for researchers and practitioners. The James Brennan Collection. Everything your father created, preserved for future generations." Thomas's jaw tightened. He looked away, blinking hard. That's not necessary. It absolutely is. How many other engineers are out there like your father? Brilliant minds who never got formal recognition because they didn't have the right credentials? Their work shouldn't be lost. We're not just preserving your father's legacy. We're making a statement about whose knowledge matters. Patricia nodded enthusiastically. We could expand it. Collect records from other self-taught engineers, experienced field workers, anyone with practical knowledge that's not being captured by traditional academic channels. Make it a living archive. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. My father used to say that buildings were the most honest things humans created. They either stood or they fell. No politics, no credentials, no excuses. Just physics and time. He'd appreciate being remembered that way, as someone whose work stood. A truck arrived at the site entrance, and Robert recognized the passenger immediately. A woman in a wheelchair, early 40s, with Thomas's same determined eyes. Thomas's daughter. Thomas hurried over, and Robert watched the reunion. Father and daughter, both survivors of a system that had failed them in different ways. She worked for Robert now, hired 3 weeks ago as an accessibility consultant, reviewing all his properties to ensure they met not just legal requirements but genuine usability standards for people with disabilities. She'd walked through the Northridge plans and identified 6 design elements that would have created barriers. All 6 had been corrected. She was brilliant, sharp, uncompromising in her standards. Robert valued that. Thomas wheeled her over to where Robert and Patricia stood. Mr. Castellan, my daughter wanted to see the site. See what came from that day in your conference room. His daughter, Jennifer, extended a hand. Robert shook it. Her grip was firm. You actually listened, she said. That's rarer than it should be. Your father didn't give me much choice. He was very convincing. She laughed. He usually is, when he's right, which is almost always. Thomas looked embarrassed but pleased. I just remember what I was taught. And now you're teaching others, Jennifer said. The program you're running, Dad. The engineers you're training. That matters more than any single building. Robert's phone buzzed again. His assistant, with a message marked urgent. He read it and felt something shift. The Parker building, he said slowly. The one in Detroit that collapsed in 1987. The site has been vacant since the demolition. The city is looking for a developer to build there again, and they are requiring any proposal to include independent geotechnical review and foundation analysis before they'll approve permits. Thomas looked at him. That's because of us, isn't it? That's because the story got attention. An old man stopping a billionaire's vanity project to prevent a disaster. It made people ask questions about how many other disasters are waiting to happen. The Parker building site is the test case. If we can build there safely, after what happened before, it proves the new approach works. Are you going to bid on it? Patricia asked. Robert looked at Thomas. Only if Mr. Brennan is willing to consult. That site took 3 months of his life once, tearing down a failure. I won't build there unless he approves the foundation design personally. Thomas walked to the edge of the Northridge site, looking at the drilling operations. Mathematics made physical. His father's calculations, proven right 40 years later, now guiding the creation of something that would stand for centuries. I'll do it, Thomas said. But not just me. I want the engineers I'm training to work the project. Real-world application of everything they are learning. We build it together. The old methods and the new ones. Experience and innovation. Deal, Robert said immediately. Over the following hour, they walked the site together, Robert's security trailing at a respectful distance. Thomas pointed out details that meant nothing to untrained eyes but everything to those who understood construction. Where the soil changed composition based on color. Where water would collect if drainage wasn't perfect. Where stress would concentrate if the building swayed in high winds. Patricia recorded everything on her tablet, taking notes that would become training materials for the Foundation initiative. Jennifer wheeled alongside them, occasionally offering observations about accessibility that applied to construction sites themselves. How equipment placement could block emergency egress. How communication systems needed backup for workers who were deaf or hard of hearing. How safety protocols often forgot that not all workers had the same physical capabilities. It was collaborative. It was effective. It was everything Robert's previous approach hadn't been. As the sun moved toward afternoon, casting long shadows across the construction site, Robert found himself thinking about the meeting 3 months ago. How close he'd come to having Thomas arrested. How easily he could have dismissed the warnings, trusted his credentialed engineers, and built a tower that would have become a catastrophe. "You saved a lot of lives," Robert said to Thomas as they headed back to the site trailer. "You know that, right? Not just the people who would have been in the Northridge building when it failed, but everyone in every other building we're now reviewing. Every project we're catching before it becomes a disaster." Thomas shrugged. "I just remembered what my father taught me, and I refused to watch another building fall." "That's not just remembering. That's courage." Walking into that conference room took guts. "Walking in was easy," Thomas said. "I was terrified you wouldn't listen. I almost didn't. I know. I saw it in your face. The moment you decided I was worth taking seriously. That's when everything changed." They reached the trailer. Inside, a dozen engineers were reviewing foundation specifications, many of them young, several of them lacking traditional credentials but possessing the kind of practical knowledge that couldn't be taught in classrooms. This was the future Thomas and his father had imagined, where knowledge mattered more than pedigree, where experience was valued alongside education, where buildings stood because the people who built them cared more about safety than schedules. Robert's phone rang again. This time it was a reporter from a major national news network. They wanted to do a feature on the Foundation Initiative, a story about how one man's courage and one executive's willingness to listen had changed an industry. Robert looked at Thomas. "Are you willing to be interviewed?" Thomas considered. "Only if they understand this isn't about me. It's about my father, and about all the workers who know things that nobody asked them about, and about changing a system that values credentials over competence." "I'll make sure they understand," Robert promised. As he took the call, arranging the interview details, Thomas sat down at one of the workstations. A young engineer immediately approached with questions about soil compaction ratios. Thomas answered patiently, drawing diagrams on a whiteboard, showing the mathematical relationships that governed how earth and concrete interacted. Jennifer watched her father teach, and Robert saw pride in her expression, not for fame or recognition, for purpose, for the fact that her father's knowledge wasn't dying with him, but spreading to a new generation that would carry it forward. The Northridge building would eventually rise, stronger, safer, smarter than the original design. It would stand as a monument not to Robert's wealth of vision, but to the importance of listening, of valuing wisdom wherever it came from, of building things that lasted not because they were expensive, but because they were right. And in a climate-controlled archive somewhere, James Brennan's life's work would be preserved. 40 years of handwritten calculations, site photographs, and hard-won knowledge. Available to anyone who wanted to learn. A gift from a self-taught genius to everyone who came after. Thomas looked up from the whiteboard and caught Robert watching him. He nodded once, a gesture of mutual respect between two men who'd learned something from each other. Buildings either stood or fell. No politics, no excuses. Just physics and time. This one would stand. 1 year later, Robert stood in the lobby of the Northridge building and looked up. 60 stories of glass and steel rose above him, sleek and modern, every line perfect. But beneath his feet, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for it, was the foundation that made everything possible. End-bearing piles reaching 90 feet down to bedrock. Waterproofing systems designed to handle soil expansion. Monitoring sensors throughout the underground structure, sending real-time data about stress distribution and settlement patterns. The most over-engineered foundation in the city. Also the safest. The building had opened 3 weeks ago. Every unit sold before construction finished, despite the delays. The buyers understood what they were purchasing. Not just luxury condos, but safety. Structural integrity verified by the man who'd become something of a legend in engineering circles. Thomas Brennan's name was everywhere now. The Foundation Initiative bearing his father's name had reviewed 4 to 7 projects in 12 months. They'd found critical flaws in 11 of them. 4 projects had been completely redesigned. 3 were still under review. 2 had been cancelled entirely when the cost of proper safety measures exceeded the developer's willingness to pay. 2 buildings that wouldn't be built was better than 2 buildings that would eventually collapse. The mandatory review law had passed 6 months ago. Every building in the state over 30 stories now required independent geotechnical assessment before permits were issued. 3 other states were considering similar legislation. The industry had fought it hard. Robert had fought harder, using his influence and resources to support the law. He'd made enemies. He'd also made a difference. Thomas entered the lobby, accompanied by a group of young engineers. They came every Tuesday, part of the ongoing training program. The Northridge building had become a teaching site, its foundation and structural systems used as a real-world laboratory for students learning how to build properly. "Mr. Castellan," Thomas greeted him, still formal after a year, still carrying that worn folder, though its contents had long since been digitized and archived. Some habits were about memory, not necessity. "Thomas, how are the students?" "Learning. Some faster than others, but all of them eager. That's what matters." The group dispersed through the lobby, examining the structural elements visible in the architectural design. How the support columns transferred load. Where the earthquake dampening systems were integrated. How the glass facade was mounted to allow for building flex without shattering. One student, a young man from a community college, approached Thomas with a question about soil bearing capacity. Thomas answered patiently, drawing diagrams on a tablet, showing the calculations that had determined the pile depth. Robert watched the interaction and thought about the butterfly effect. One old man walking into a conference room. One executive willing to listen instead of dismissing. From that single moment, an entire ecosystem of change had grown. Lives saved that would never know they'd been in danger. Careers launched for people who might never have gotten opportunities in the old system. An industry forced to reckon with its blind spots. His phone buzzed. Jennifer Brennan, texting from the office upstairs where she now ran the accessibility consulting division. Her team had grown to 15 people, all working to make Robert's properties genuinely inclusive. She'd expanded the mission beyond his company, consulting for other developers, teaching workshops, writing standards that were being adopted nationwide. The text read, "Inspection team is here. Ready when you are." Robert excused himself and took the elevator to the 47th floor. The same conference room where this had all begun. But now it was different. The table was the same. The windows were the same. But the people were different. And more importantly, the purpose was different. Seated around the table were members of the State Construction Safety Board, independent engineers, and representatives from the Parker Building Project in Detroit. The project Robert and Thomas had worked on for the past 9 months, building on the site of the previous failure, proving that catastrophe could be prevented through diligence and proper engineering. Thomas arrived a few minutes later, and the inspection team stood to greet him. He was no longer an intruder who didn't belong. He was the expert they'd come to consult, the man whose approval would determine whether their work met the standards he'd established. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Soil reports were reviewed. Foundation designs examined. Monitoring systems evaluated. Safety protocols assessed. Thomas asked hard questions. The team answered thoroughly. By the end, he was satisfied. "The Parker building will stand," he said simply, "for a very long time." The team visibly relaxed. Thomas Brennan's approval meant something. It meant the work was solid. It meant the engineering was sound. It meant lives were protected. After they left, Robert and Thomas stood alone in the conference room. Outside the windows, the city sprawled in every direction. Thousands of buildings, millions of people, all of them trusting that the structures sheltering them were safe. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Robert asked. "When you walked in here?" Thomas smiled slightly. "Every time I enter this room, I remember being terrified, thinking you'd have me arrested, wondering if I was making a mistake. You were saving lives. I was honoring a promise. To my father, to my daughter, to everyone who'd been hurt by buildings that shouldn't have failed. Your father's archive is getting international attention now," Robert said. "Engineers from 6 countries have requested access. Universities are incorporating his methods into curriculum. There's talk of a documentary." Thomas looked uncomfortable with the attention, as always. The work matters, not the recognition. The recognition makes people pay attention to the work. That matters too. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city. Somewhere down there, construction sites operated under new rules. Safety reviews happened as standard practice. Workers with practical knowledge were consulted alongside credentialed engineers. The system had changed, slowly but measurably. Jennifer entered the conference room, wheeling herself to where they stood. The accessibility audit for the Parker building came back. Full compliance with enhanced standards. They actually listened. Because you gave them no choice, Robert said with a smile. Because you backed me up, she corrected. Money talks. You used yours to say the right things. Thomas put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they'd survived together. The accident, the recovery, the transformation of pain into purpose. Mom would be proud, Jennifer said quietly. Of both of us. Thomas's expression softened. He didn't talk much about his late wife, but Robert knew she'd been the foundation of their family. The one who'd supported Thomas through the hard years after Morrison Construction collapsed. The one who'd encouraged him to keep using the knowledge his father had passed down, even when nobody seemed to value it. She would be, Thomas agreed. She always said knowledge was a gift that increased when you shared it. I'm finally understanding what she meant. Robert's phone buzzed again. His assistant, with a message that made him pause. He read it twice, then looked at Thomas. There's someone downstairs who wants to meet you. Robert Castellan Jr. is 17, wants to be an engineer. Specifically wants to learn from you. Says he read about the Northridge building in school and it changed what he wants to do with his life. Thomas blinked. Your son. My son, who I've been grooming to take over the business since he was 12. Except he doesn't want the business. He wants to build things that last. He wants to do what you do. Robert's voice carried a complex mix of emotions. Pride, surprise, a little bit of loss for the future he'd imagined, but also respect for his son's choice. I'd be honored to teach him, Thomas said. If you'll allow it. Allow it. I'm encouraging it. Someone needs to carry this forward after we're gone. Might as well be someone who actually cares about doing it right. They took the elevator down together, the three of them. Thomas, Jennifer, and Robert. A year ago, they'd been strangers. Now there was something else. Not quite friends, that wasn't the right word. More like fellow travelers on a path they'd discovered together, committed to changing something that needed changing, one building at a time. In the lobby, Robert's son waited, tall like his father, but with his mother's thoughtful eyes. He had a notebook, already filled with questions. The kind of questions that showed genuine curiosity, not just polite interest. Thomas shook his hand. Your father tells me you want to learn engineering. I want to learn to build things that don't fall down, the young man corrected. That seems important. Thomas laughed. The first truly unguarded laugh Robert had heard from him. That's exactly the right answer. Come on, let me show you what a proper foundation looks like. They walked toward the elevator that would take them down to the underground parking structure, where the foundation was visible in all its over-engineered glory. Robert's son asked questions rapid fire. Thomas answered each one thoroughly. Jennifer followed, offering her own perspective on how accessibility considerations integrated with structural design. Robert stayed in the lobby, watching them go. His phone buzzed again. Another interview request. Another project wanting consultation. Another opportunity to demonstrate that the new approach worked. He thought about the photograph Thomas had shown him a year ago. The Parker building in Detroit, collapsed and twisted, a monument to assumptions and negligence. That photograph still existed. But soon there would be new photographs. The same site, but different. A building that stood strong. Evidence that learning from mistakes was possible. His son's laughter echoed up from the stairwell where Thomas was explaining something about soil compaction ratios. The sound was joyful, eager, alive with the kind of curiosity that drove real learning. Robert made a decision he'd been considering for months. He pulled out his phone and called Patricia. I'm stepping back, he said when she answered. Not retiring, but stepping back from day-to-day operations. I want to focus on the foundation initiative full-time. Make it bigger. Make it self-sustaining. Make it permanent. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, about time. You've been wanting to do this for 6 months. What finally convinced you? watching my son discover what matters, realizing I want to spend my time on work that actually matters too. Building towers made me rich. But what we're doing now, this might actually make a difference. It already has made a difference, Patricia said. But I understand. You want it to outlast you. Exactly. The James Brennan Foundation Safety Initiative needs to exist in 50 years. In 100 years. As long as people are building things, we need people checking to make sure they are built right. Then let's make it happen. I'll have a transition plan on your desk by Friday. Robert hung up and walked to the windows. Outside, the city continued its endless movement. People going about their lives, unaware of the invisible infrastructure keeping them safe. That was how it should be. Safety shouldn't be visible. It should be assumed. Built in from the beginning. Non-negotiable. Thomas emerged from the stairwell 30 minutes later, his student group complete. Robert's son was still asking questions. Thomas was still answering patiently. Some teachers were born. Others were made through experience and loss and the determination to ensure nobody else suffered what they'd suffered. Thomas was both. Born with the mind for it. Made into a teacher by necessity and grief. Same time next week. Thomas asked Robert's son. Yes, sir. And I'll have read the chapters you assigned. The ones from your father's archive. Good. We'll discuss practical applications. Theory is important, but you need to understand how things work in reality. How soil actually behaves, not just how the textbook says it should. They shook hands, the formal gesture of respect between teacher and student. Then Robert's son left, already texting friends about what he'd learned. Thomas turned to Robert. Your son is sharp. Really sharp. Give him 5 years of proper training. He'll be better than most engineers with twice the experience. He is a good teacher. He has a willing mind. That's rarer than good teaching. Jennifer had been waiting by the door, reviewing something on her tablet. She looked up as they approached. Dad, you have that interview in an hour. The documentary crew. Thomas sighed but nodded. More talking about the past instead of working on the future. The past explains the future, Robert said. People need to understand how we got here. How one conversation in this building changed everything that followed. They walked outside together, into afternoon sunlight that made the glass facade of the Northridge building glow. From street level, you couldn't see the foundation. Couldn't see the 90-foot piles reaching down to bedrock. Couldn't see the monitoring sensors or the waterproofing systems or any of the engineering that made the building possible. But it was there, invisible and essential, like so much of what mattered. The documentary crew was setting up in the plaza outside. Cameras, lighting, sound equipment. They wanted to film Thomas standing in front of the building, the man who'd saved it before it was ever built. As the interview began, Robert stood back and watched. Thomas talked about his father, about 48 years of construction work, about the Riverside Plaza and his daughter's accident, about walking into a conference room where he didn't belong because staying silent was no longer an option. The interviewer asked, "What do you want people to learn from your story?" Thomas thought carefully before answering. That knowledge exists everywhere, in unexpected places, in people without credentials, and that listening, really listening, can save lives. Mr. Castellan didn't have to hear me out. He could have had me arrested. Instead, he listened. And because he listened, this building will stand for centuries. That's what I want people to learn. Listen to the voices you're used to dismissing. Because sometimes those voices know something you desperately need to hear. The interview continued, but Robert had heard what he needed to. He pulled out his phone and made a note. A reminder for a speech he'd be giving next month at a construction industry conference. Listen to the voices you're used to dismissing. That would be the title. That would be the message. The simple truth that had changed everything. Worth wasn't determined by appearance or credentials or status. Dignity was owed to every human. Hidden value existed everywhere. And kindness cost nothing, while cruelty cost everything. Robert looked up at the building he'd almost built wrong. The tower that would have been his greatest achievement and his greatest failure. Now it was just his greatest achievement. Because someone had cared enough to warn him, and he'd been wise enough to listen. In the end, that was all any of them could do. Care enough to speak up. Be wise enough to listen. build things that stood not because they were expensive, but because they were right. The Northridge building would stand for 200 years, maybe more, long after everyone involved in its creation was gone. A monument to the importance of doing things properly, to valuing knowledge over credentials, to listening when it mattered most. Thomas finished his interview and walked back to where Robert stood. That's done. Can we get back to real work now? What counts as real work? There's a project in Baltimore, 20-story office building. The SOAR reports look wrong to me. I want to review them before they break ground. Then let's review them. That's what we do now. They walked back into the building together, their shadows stretching long across the plaza. Above them, 60 stories of glass and steel reached toward the sky. Beneath them, a foundation built to last forever. Around them, a city full of buildings they'd helped make safer. And ahead of them, more work to do, more warnings to issue, more lives to save. One building at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment of listening at a time. It was enough. It had to be enough, because it was all any of them could control. The work, the care, the commitment to building things that lasted. Everything else was just details. If you've made it this far, thank you for engaging with this story. Please take a moment to like this video, share your final thoughts in the comments, share this with someone who needs this message, subscribe to never miss another powerful narrative, and check the description box below for more true stories that will inspire and challenge you. Your support makes these stories possible.